the Governor's Intergovernmental Commission on Agriculture's Value-Added Agriculture and Agritourism Subcommittee meeting for September 2025. My name is Martin Prue, Value-Added Agricultural Specialist with the Maryland Department of Agriculture and Chair of this subcommittee. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded in accordance with the Maryland Open Meetings Act to ensure transparency and public access to proceedings. All attendees are considered to have consented to being recorded by participating in this meeting. I think it's been very obvious that summer is over and school has started, so we appreciate everybody's flexibility and willingness to join us today. Some new faces, so if it's all right, I think we will kick off with some introductions. We have one guest in the room, and if that's okay, we'll start there. Mr. Malone. Okay.
Hi, I'm Joe Malone. I'm the Agricultural Programs Manager with the Maryland Department of Commerce.
And Harrison Palmer, the Executive Secretary of MDA's Boards and Commissions.
And now we can jump online as we see them left to right.
Do you just want to go down the list?
We'll go down the list. How does that sound? Amy Crone.
Everyone, good afternoon. I'm Amy Crone, currently serving as chair of the Maryland Ag Commission.
We have Cassie Shirk.
Hi, everyone. Cassie Shirk, Assistant Secretary at the Department of Agriculture.
Dr. Cliff Mitchell.
Clifford Mitchell, Maryland Department of Health, Environmental Health Bureau.
Debbie Cornwell, I believe, is next.
Hi, good afternoon. Debbie Cornwell, Maryland Department of Planning, Manager of the Natural Resources and Working Lands Unit.
Gabriel Tissian, is that right, Gabriel?
He will not be here today. Oh, he is here today. Sorry. He is here. He is the preventive medicine resident rotating in environmental health.
Next, we have Hans Schmidt.
Yeah, Hans Schmidt, Assistant Secretary for Resource Conservation at MDA.
And Jenny Dempsey.
Hi, I'm Jenny Dempsey. I'm the Director of the Office of Planning and Zoning for Anne Arundel County, here serving the Maryland Association of Planning Officers.
Jesse Richards.
Jessica Richards, member at large, and also I work for Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland.
Joanne Chasen.
Hi, Joanne Chase, Vice President, Maryland Farm Bureau.
Thank you. Next, we have Josh Parker.
Hi, Joshua Parker, Caroline County Health Department, and I'm representing the health officers.
Next, we have Justin. Justin.
Don't know why that's not showing up. Justin Fiore here, MML Advocacy Director.
Hi, Justin. Kelly Dudek.
Hi, Kelly Dudek, former chair of the Maryland Ag Commission, also co-founder of Cultivate and Craft, working with agritourism, value-added, and craft alcohol manufacturers, and I'm serving as an at-large member.
Thank you. Next, we have Nancy Nunn.
Good afternoon. Nancy Nunn. I'm the Assistant Director of the Hughes Center for Agroecology and serving as large member. Thank you.
And Naomi Howe.
Good afternoon, Naomi Howe, Program Manager for wastewater permits from Maryland Department of the Environment.
Thank you. Dr. Prem Bhandari.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prem Bhandari with the University of Maryland Institute for Extension. I'm in agritourism and especially working in agritourism and value-added agricultural marketing.
Thank you. Next on the list, very, very long list. Thank you all for joining us. Sam Bolton.
I'm Sam Bolton. I'm with Maryland Department of Health, Office of Food Protection, and I'm the chief of the Center for Facility and Process Review.
Thank you. Sierra Chris.
Hi, Sierra Chris, Financial Program Specialist at Marvin Co.
And Stephanie Jones.
Hi, Stephanie Jones, Principal Planner for Queen Anne's County, representing Maryland Association of Counties.
Thank you, Stephanie. And last but not least, Wagner Benedito. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Wagner Benedito, Associate Dean for Research at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I'm here only on just to understand a little bit better agriculture in Maryland. I'm coming from West Virginia, and the university here, MES, is represented by Dr. Bandari, who already introduced himself.
Thank you. That concludes the introductions. We will move on to approval of July 2025 minutes before we jump into business. First, I will ask if everyone has the opportunity to review the minutes from the committee meeting in July. If there are not any changes or updates, I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved by Joanne, motion by Joanne. Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Nancy. Thank you.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion passes. Now we'll move into the committee discussions and updates. We'll start, if you've heard me speak a lot about MDA's initiative surrounding a statewide guidance and analysis document specific to value-added agriculture. During the July meeting, we shared some project updates that included the opportunities and challenges that have already been identified through MDA's outreach and the drafting of this document, as well as sort of the perceived framework for how this document will offer the guidance it is proposing as it relates to the varying regulatory frameworks specific to value-added agriculture and agritourism. I don't have a significant update that qualifies a PowerPoint presentation. We had said that the end of September is our deadline for a hopeful online publication, and so far we are on time for that. We have visited a few more counties, and so we should have a total of 20 out of 24 counties visited over the course of 6 months, which is a lot of drive time, but a lot of great discussion. So for those new to this conversation and unfamiliar, these regulatory roundtables have been MDA collaborating with various offices of economic development and agricultural development to meet with local decision makers and regulators to discuss the challenges facing the evolution of agriculture into the value-added operations as well as agritourism, and simply the idea of farms beginning to engage more and more with members of the public and all of the challenges that often come through the roadmap to compliance. So hopefully a lot more to update at the full GICA meeting as well as the future subcommittee, but that's going very well, and we appreciate everybody's patience with us and perspective through this 6-month process. With that, I will move on to updates.
Yeah, do you want to go into new business, or do you want to go right to discussion updates on other visas? Probably should go into business first.
Go into new business first? Yeah, I think so. So new business is populated by a few new concepts. For the past couple of work group subcommittee meetings, the topics have been pretty standardized as we wait for some regulatory processes to work through and continue to work on this statewide guidance document. There have been 2 topics of discussion that have been recently arisen that were important to bring forth to this subcommittee to talk through. The first is, again, a bit of an ongoing conversation that I'll shed a little light on as it relates to agritourism and some environmental health regulations that we're continually getting some understanding on. I don't see any of our MDE colleagues on with us today, so I will keep that brief. And then we will allow public member Kelly Judek to expand on discussion related to agricultural assessment and some future discussions. But just so you all are aware, you've heard me discuss the parking areas and some challenges related to agritourism parking areas. So Traditionally, farms and agricultural operations work with their soil conservation districts when establishing conservation and farm plans. That usually includes not only erosion and sediment control for where they're going to farm, but how they're going to farm and where those roads and infrastructure are going to lay out. So typically we all understand the gravel farm roads that the tractors and combines can effectively travel, farm vehicles, etc. Heavy use parking areas for the storage of large equipment, heavy use areas, also pads at the edge of poultry houses, etc. Some conservation standards that exist that the soil conservation districts can use to help farms mitigate some of the runoff and some of these challenges, while also meeting standards of stormwater management and erosion and sediment control. We are recognizing, and this will be spelled out, and I believe we had alluded to it last meeting when we talked about the statewide guidance document and some opportunities, challenges, is that there are some state definitions that are very narrow in what agricultural activities are. And when we say narrow, we mean they discredit the idea that members of the public can sometimes need to access these farms for various activities and for certain farm business models to be successful. So under the Department of Environment's definition, and it's not dissimilar to many other existing definitions in statute or regulation, is that agriculture is defined as a place where products are grown, harvested, and stored. Not necessarily sold, not necessarily picked by members of the public. So it's a very narrow definition, and then it continues to combat with the concept of commercial. I think the whole past 6 months, I have to put commercial in air quotes as I talk about that, because commercial in the standard definition is a business generating revenue, but commercial in the idea and sense of land use and permitting is often associated with a heavier lift. Obviously, agriculture and rural communities are zoned one way when your commercial zone are more development communities in certain jurisdictions and counties. So the idea being that we've run into a challenge where there's sometimes a disconnect to where the soil conservation district can assist in the planning and outline some of these roads and parking areas for members of the public to engage in agritourism activities versus certain local interpretations of permitting processes specific to how MDE requires stormwater management for various commercial activities versus the erosion and sediment control allowed to be exempt for agricultural activities. So that's an ongoing conversation. I do know, I don't want to speak for MDE when they're not here, but there was some stormwater regulation rewrite coming down the pipe, just routine update of the stormwater regulations. I believe we were told to keep an eye out for the public register on September 22nd for some proposed regulation, and we were waiting for that to post to get a bit more clarity on where we go from there in working with the agricultural community to ensure that there's some clarity with agritourism parking and roadways on farms versus what is being commercially permitted on a farm property. I think that's all I can share today without our colleagues present. With that, if it's okay, I'll move on to the next discussion of this. Or first, I'll open it up for questions, I guess, if anyone wanted some clarity. Again, I'm not MDE, but we've been having these conversations for a few meetings now. And if anyone needs any background information or clarifying information, I'm happy to provide it. Hearing none, we'll move on. The next item under new business is. Oh,
No, you don't have a question. I was just going to give you an update that the stormwater regs that we haven't posted anything yet, but we're expected to make some announcements soon and can discuss the schedule in more detail at the next sub-cabinet meeting.
Thank you, Noni. I'm sorry you introduced yourself and I proceeded to continue like MDE wasn't at the table. So thank you.
That's okay.
Thanks
Cliff
for
told me I've been fired, so that was fine with me. I was just hanging out with you guys.
I got nothing here. Martin. I kept on wondering whether it was just I hadn't received the news yet.
We know it's been a long summer and kicking off fall. I apologize, Noni. So yeah, we know that from the updates, we know from the regulatory process and the cycle of how this all works, that this was going to be kind of slow as far as updates, but hopefully we've got a lot of great information next time around on both the guidance document and some of these proposed regs. But with that, we'll jump into a relatively new conversation for this group, and I'll ask Public Member Kelly Dudek if she's okay starting us off to discuss the agricultural assessment discussion, more specifically how the State Department of Assessment and Taxation are currently assessing agricultural properties and how value-added agriculture and agritourism are being affected through the current framework of the assessments.
Sure, and I think just for some context, the full GICA committee voted at our last full meeting to take this on as a bit of a priority. So I think it was just asked of me to give a little bit of a history and context to this very large group today, just so we know what we're all talking about. So in 2022 or 2023, farmers and agricultural advocates began raising alarms about a troubling trend, and that was that we were seeing agricultural properties being reassessed by the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, SDAT, as commercial, despite no real meaningful change in the land use. These reassessments often they came because the addition of agricultural activities or on-farm retail, or simply the appearance that the farm was financially successful. In short, the perception was if a farm is profitable, then it must be commercial. And I know Martin was air quoting commercial, but this is going to continue to come back. That word and agriculture have been at odds for decades now. The issue triggered multiple meetings, agency discussions, the formation of informal and formal work groups. And with some of you that are on the call, I know we've talked about this at length, to explore solutions and clarify assessment criterias. But over the years, no meaningful guidance, policy change, or relief has emerged so far. So what we know, that's the background and history. And I'll just say, like, as of today, farmers continue to report reassessments that are basically stripping their agricultural classification, leading to, in some cases, pretty dramatic increases in property taxes, even when the primary use remains agricultural. There's growing frustration in the agricultural community, especially among value-added ag and agritourism operators who really rely on that diversification to survive. These operations are being penalized for innovation, even as the state is actively encouraging practices in the economic development and land preservation strategies. So it's just that SDAT's interpretation appears inconsistent across jurisdictions. There's no clear, accessible guidance for farmers or assessors. And so the result right now is confusion, unpredictability, and like I said, in some cases, a pretty dramatic increase. We've seen it. We had one farm who was a 900% increase. So it's been all across the board. And we're not necessarily asking for this to be fixed legislatively. It's something that we can hopefully address administratively. But I wanted to give a background to this group. Harrison or Martin want me to say any more, or open for discussion just to talk about it? I know there's other people on the call that have been involved in this.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kelly. I think it's appropriate to open it for discussion. If anyone has any questions for Kelly specific to the background she just provided, or anybody has anything to add, we can open the floor.
Hi, Harrison and Kelly. Justin Fiore here on behalf of Maryland Municipal League. I've been a part of these conversations now for the past 3 or 4 years. I know we're doing a lot of hard work here, and we've tried to come, some of the way on more traditional agricultural products, but we really struggle, at least in the legislative component, of treating wineries and breweries like, a farm when it's commercial business. So we're going to probably continue to have that sticking point, and I'm very interested to hear how you're looking to maybe use the administrative process rather than the legislative process.
I think it was determined in those work groups that it really could come down to some wording and more communication between the director of SDAT, potentially the secretary of MDA and others to come to a consensus on maybe what the definition of agriculture is. I know it's a sticking point for me too, to hear. I think, Justin, it was either you or someone else in the meeting that said like Bordy vineyards in particularly should not be considered agriculture. That's just, I don't know how we get past that. I mean, they are our oldest winery in the state with acres of grapes in the ground. It is very clearly agriculture. They just happen to also sell a product from the farm. And that's where this differentiation is coming in. It's very tricky.
Yeah, and Kelly, I get that. I think we often talk about the difference between the land used for growing and then the property and the construction of the building that's specifically used to house, produce, and sell in mass wine or beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are different. We're not talking about the actual agricultural land here being charged a different assessment. So for those on the call that don't have the background, I think it's a very important distinction.
Yeah, I'll jump in briefly too. And Justin, I'm happy to update you and MML as well on the development of the statewide guidance document, talking about sort of how the state interpretation of what agriculture is, and more importantly, what agriculture is becoming and how it trickles down to local interpretation is certainly something that's being analyzed in that. The traditional concept of agriculture, growing things and storing things, why selling things was never tied into the concept of what a commercial farm needs to do to be successful is certainly an interesting discussion. But we recognize that agricultural activities have evolved, and we believe that in recognizing what an agricultural activity is and what it needs to be for farms to be successful, through this document, of course, we're analyzing some recent census numbers, and we're seeing that size is really deteriorating across the 12,000 plus farms in the state. 70% of them are under 100 acres. Over 55% of them are under 50 acres, and more than 15% of them are under 10 acres. So we recognize that value added component is really important, and it's not necessarily a plan to expand into commercial enterprise, rather keep the farm in one way or another. So happy to continue that discussion. To that point, we wanted to just introduce the concept. As Kelly had said, the full council had introduced it for this subcommittee to work through and have some conversations about. Obviously, SDAT is a very important agency to be part of these conversations, and we'll certainly extend an invitation to them for our next subcommittee meeting in November. And by November, there will be a statewide guidance document to discuss as well.
I would like to just add in there that it has not only affected, these three assessments have not only affected value added, it has also affected farming operations, equine operations. So it's, yes, it has affected the value added at a higher percentage, I would say, but there are other farmers that have been affected by this.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
May I also add that it kind of can go the other way as well, in that we have maybe large homes sitting on a 20-acre piece of property that are also zoned agriculture, or it's not zoned, assessed agriculture as well, and they're not being used for agriculture, other than they're just sitting on a really large lot. And I've had this kind of circular conversation with myself on both sides of the spectrum, and it is, as Kelly said earlier, it is a slippery slope. So that is a factor that you may want to have in kind of the back of your mind, that there's a large group of property owners out there that are assessed ag, and they're not ag, they're just sitting on large pieces of property.
To that point, I would just add that the current owner may not be using it for agriculture purposes, but it could prevent a future owner from coming in and wanting to use a property. Reassessing it and changing the taxes on that property could then prevent a farmer from wanting to farm it in the future, being able to take that property and turn it back into farmable ground. So again, it's a very slippery slope that we need to be
Yeah.
very cognizant of.
Yeah.
And the zoning also does come into play with that, where you could be assessed agriculture, but your zoning could be like a low residential zoning district too.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jenny, because we've through, and sorry, I know you all are tired of hearing me talk about this guidance document. I promise it'll be published, and I won't be soapboxing about it all the time, but bringing up that point of just the properties, the intent of the properties, but also just the fact that the state has a few minimum expectations of what a property is doing to be compliant with nutrient management laws and those laws and mandates at the state level from an environmental concept that, you know, designates you a farm, even though, again, farm isn't necessarily defined except for regulation of nutrient management, and a few other state agencies define it for the sake of licensing or permitting purposes. But it's a very, very simple concept with not a very hefty threshold. And as we talk about the development of some of these expanded activities through this subcommittee, as well as GICA, right? Some fellow agencies, MDE has brought it up in that, you know, if MDA could create that North Star and recognize what agriculture really is, what it needs to be, and when does it stop being an agricultural activity, that, you know, MDA could potentially take a role in providing some of that direction. And we think that might help in some of these other conversations, even potentially talking about the assessment side. But you're right, between zoning and tax assessment, those are sometimes contradictory when a farm is trying to prove to a state agency that they are eligible for a license and that they are indeed a farm. Maybe they haven't even volunteered or pursued the ag tax assessment, or maybe they're tax assessed, but they're in a rural zone, right? Not an agricultural zone. And you have to dig deep in a table of permissible uses. So it's very complex, and there's not always one place to look to check that box and say, yes, you're a farm. Yes, you're a value-added enterprise. Yes, you're protected under this, that, and the other. And so that's what we're going to look at. And I look forward to sharing some of those findings when the next subcommittee for sure. But
I think another point that's important to, because I know there's not a lot of agricultural people necessarily on this call, but I mean, farming is changing. It's been changing for a while, but I think at an exponential rate recently. And traditional farming, as we all think about it, the margins are so much tighter than they've ever been. And so you almost have to expand into value added or something like that to make the numbers work. And so that's why this is becoming such a top issue right now. And the other part of it is this discussion of agricultural versus commercial. I think for decades, those of us in the agricultural world have been fighting that battle. And recently, at least for me, I think it's come into focus a little bit more to just tell everyone that agricultural is commercial. It's not a nonprofit industry. Like, these farmers have to make money to keep this land working land, but it's also agricultural, which means that it comes with a whole host of, issues that make it really hard, whether it's weather or pests or deer or whatever it is. That is the reason the agricultural assessment exists, because it's very hard to farm under these conditions and to turn a profit. So that is where a lot of these operators are coming from. You know, they have a lot of money sunk into their operations. They're not rich people. And so to have this assessment be tripled and sometimes much more is likely going to put these farmers out of business. So it's a big deal.
I did have a question about these discussions. Has the concept of mixed use been brought up in the zoning or talks with the assessments or anything like that? Because you're ending up with like a mixed use where the primary part of the property is agricultural, but you have one building or two buildings that do the value-added part of it, which in more common terms, they're literally a commercial use. The brewery building or whatever the processing building is, that really is commercial. in its intent and how it's used, but it's still in a agricultural setting. So has that been part of the discussions in the past? Because it sounds like that's a way to kind of sort of like move forward, just like we do with the land preservation, where you preserve most of the acreage around the farm. That's not touchable for development, but this one section is where this is where the buildings are, this is where the house is at, this is where all the activity is. So it sounds like you might be getting to a point where you might have to identify that for the difference between what's your traditional farming and what's your value added part of it. That may be a conversation that may help move this along a little easier, as opposed to it's the whole farm or nothing. So that's my comment.
I think that has come up a little bit, and I appreciate the point about ag land preservation, because we have seen it move in that direction, which I think somewhat unfortunate, but it also helpful that we're carving out, places to have activities like this. We didn't necessarily talk about changing the zoning per se on the farm, but when we're talking about carving out a building, then we went down a pretty steep rabbit hole, because a lot of these buildings may be used for manufacturing for a small part of the year, and then they're used for storage for farm equipment, and they're used for something else. And it was just like, how do we calculate that? It got tricky real fast.
And to clarify, when we're discussing some of these informal conversations, working with the Department of Assessment and Taxation, we're several months removed. So Director Yeager is relatively new in his role as Director of SDAT. So this could be an opportunity to just re-engage the conversation. So if that makes sense for the subcommittee, we'll absolutely extend the invitation to SDAT, include this topic as old business, and open it just for further discussion, so we have an expert in the room, and then we can continue to have discussion and see the best path forward, whether or not it is the admin out of legislative action, or if there's a bigger conversation to be had amongst the commission as a whole. But thank you very much for kicking that off, Kelly. A very constructive discussion, a lot of great points made across the board. And making it clear that why it's such a complicated discussion topic, and why we need to continue to collaborate on it. So thank you for that. If there's no further comments on that item, I think it's appropriate to move to old business, which is just again a couple updates if our colleagues are willing. We know that legislative cycles aren't really full kicked into gear yet, so there's probably only so much we can discuss. But Dr. Mitchell, if you don't mind, we'll turn to MDH for the proposed regulation as it relates to the on-farm home processing, chemical toilets, and anything else you'd like to discuss on on-farm food service.
Yep. Thank you, Martin. So I guess I can't really say much has happened. Chemical toilets, as in fact, as you know, first of all, it's already in statute, so we are just now reconciling our regulations with the statutory change from this past session. That regulation is still internal and moving forward, but hasn't yet, I think, changed from the last time we discussed it. With respect to the proposed regulation on-farm processing, that regulation has been moving forward, and although it's still internal, has not yet gone to AELR, but I expect that will happen shortly, and I expect that we will see it. I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic, that it will be in an upcoming publication of the Register for Public Comment. So we still have, I don't think at this point that there have been any major obstacles identified. So I do anticipate that regulation in particular, which, as you know, raises the cap for on-farm processing for everyone from $40,000 to $50,000, and also removes the cap altogether for people who process external or off-site meat and cheese, and then bring that back for further distribution and/or sale. So I expect that regulation will in fact be coming out for public comment shortly.
Great update. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, if that's it for MDH, obviously it sounds like some exciting updates come next subcommittee when things are filed and we can have a bit more of a discussion. We'll ask Noni, you kind of already touched on the stormwater management reg, so I don't know if there's anything more to add to that. That's also just a proposed regulation waiting for it to publish on the register and open for public comment.
The only thing I will add is the department is in the process of revising COMOR 260402, which is the basic septic regs for just generic terms, which includes the chemical toilet definition that Dr. Mitchell was speaking about. We are incorporating in their mobile wastewater facilities, because I think there's a lot of confusion thinking that the mobile trucks that provide wastewater facilities are actually chemical toilets, which they are not. So we're clarifying some conditions. We're revamping COMAR a lot. That's still in the preliminary stages. It's not ready for sharing at the moment, but hopefully within the next, I don't know, I want to say month and a half, we'll have them ready for sharing and reaching out to stakeholders to discuss. So that's more to come. We're also working to fine tune within those regulations some of the contentious parts of where they overlap or may appear to interfere with certain development for parcels of record or ag operations. And we're not necessarily addressing ag, but we're addressing larger parcels where we've run into a lot of innovative ways people want to utilize their land to make sure that they're consistent with sewage disposal and that it's appropriate allocation for sewage disposal for those properties. So just as a heads up, that's all.
Thank you, Noni. Now you said getting creative with uses, so I am going to ask this question. You can knock me back down and we can talk about it later, but obviously the magic word camping comes in as it relates to agritourism. Are there any direct implications for what is being proposed in that regard? We know that the word camping, the concept of camping, has a lot of layers too, not just within MDE, but Department of Health and localities. But is that anything that's going to be affected in any way, shape, or form through these proposed regs that we need to be familiar with?
I can't speak directly that it will affect them. I'm talking creative where we have accessory dwelling units. You know, I know it's about ag and this is about ag, but we do have a few other areas that we get approached about. So the camping, I think the regulations are pretty clear and they're actually covered under another section of our regulations, which is subdivision, covers campgrounds. So that would be a different area of regulations to look at. But as far as designating sewage disposal areas on land is where I think it will affect it the most and what the requirements would be for that. And it's clearly a difference between commercial, as I heard you discuss, and residential use, both in strength of wastewater and how we manage it and how we designate sewage disposal areas, and wastewater flow numbers based on the use, because that could trigger, you know, a state permit versus a local permit. So we're just trying to clear up some perceived gray areas. We're trying to assist the local approving authorities to areas where there has been some confusion in the past, is what we're looking to accomplish with this. Wish us luck.
We do. Any questions for Noni or Dr. Mitchell? Dr. Mitchell, you still have your hand up. I didn't know if you wanted to add to.
Yeah, I just want to add, the Department of Health does have regulations on campgrounds and bathhouses. We are continuing to coordinate with Noni. This is an area that comes up a lot. And so as you say, Martin, it's an area that has a lot of discussion attached to it. And we are in early stages of looking at revising our regulations for both mobile home parks and campgrounds. And both of these, but particularly campgrounds, end up being places where we get a lot of discussion around campgrounds that are established or camping that is established on agricultural property.
And I will also kick in, I agree, it's a lot with Maryland Department of Health, but it's also with the water supply, because there's a definition of a community water supply that triggers based on the number of users. And so it's a little more complicated with campgrounds than it is some of the other processes that we go through. So I don't know that we will have a quick fix for you for campgrounds based on that.
So we know there's no quick fix, Noni, but just again, having these conversations and being clear where the lines are drawn in the sand. Again, something that the statewide guidance document is looking at is the state definition of agritourism has a lot of things under its umbrella. Obviously, the majority of those things require a farm to exist, right? You can't have a farm fresh winery if you're not growing grapes on site. You can't have a petting zoo if you don't have a pen of animals in pasturage. You can't have a pick your own produce if you don't have a pumpkin patch. But of course, at that top layer, when you talk about events and activities and also camping activities, those are uses that are defined in localities in most cases that can exist in many different zones across rural, agricultural, and commercial zones. And when those standards exist, now we see what we're talking about is that there are state regs that affect it, whether it's on a farm or not. And so those are conversations to be had moving forward as well of the farm specific activities, what makes it unique to a farm and when it's on a farm and how is it different. And that's when conversations can potentially be had about the uniqueness and the potential solutions. But as long as we continue to talk about them as the same exact thing, just so happens to be sitting on 20 acres surrounded by field, we do have a hard time taking a step back and treating it any differently. So I think I just wanted to inquire about camping when you said creative ideas, Noni. But thank you for the clarity on that. And I thank you for the Comar references as well. Any other questions for MDH or MDE? Hearing none. Well, we appreciate actually a lot of great updates in a relatively quick meeting. We appreciate everyone's time. I will open it up to see if there's any other remarks for the good of the order before we move to adjourn. Hearing none. I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Joanne. Second?
I'll second it.
Nancy on the second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the motion moves. We hereby adjourn the September 2025 subcommittee meeting for value-added agriculture and agritourism. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in 2 months.
Thank you.
Thank you.